How many is this now? 4! Man, this is the 4th time I've made a video on Season 7, and I have a feeling it won't be the last. Anyway, on with the video. Season 7 is, in my opinion, a fantastic season of Thomas and Friends. There are so many fantastic episodes: Salty Stormy Tale, Gordon and Spencer, James and the Queen of Sodor, and many, many more. But the one I'm talking about today is the 4th episode of the season, The Old Bridge. This episode is one of the most controversial episodes of the whole show. A lot of people have discussed it before me, and most of them have referred to it as the worst episode of not only Season 7, but also the entire classic era, if you count Season 6 and 7 as classic seasons. I'm going to analyse this episode in depth and see if it really is the worst classic episode, or is instead an underrated gem. In my Season 7 ranking, I said that The Old Bridge is actually good, and that it doesn't deserve the hate it gets. In order to explain my reasons as to why I think this, I've split the video into 3 main headings. 1. Is Skarloey out of character? 2. Is the episode itself good or bad? And 3. If The Old Bridge isn't the worst classic episode, then what is? Let's look at the first one. The basic plot of The Old Bridge is that Skarloey almost falls off a tall bridge, and after his accident he's too afraid to cross it again. However, when Rhaenys is stuck on the bridge, Skarloey overcomes his fear to help him. People hate this episode because they think Skarloey is out of character, and that this led to his infamous butchering in the Hit era. This section of the video will discuss whether or not I agree with this statement, and the simple answer is, I don't. While this episode does lead to his regression in the Hit era, Skarloey is not out of character in The Old Bridge, or the 7th series in general. One of the main things I love about Season 7 is its wonderful character moments. The season revived Diesel's sneaky, intimidating persona from Season 2, did more with Gordon's character than Seasons 5 and 6 combined, and brought back Bulgy. When looking at all of these, it doesn't make sense that this one episode would butcher a random character that had been doing so well in the previous 3 seasons. It's also worth noting that the 21st episode of Season 7, the grand opening, captures Skarloey's kind, hard-working persona perfectly, which proves that the season knew how to write for him. So why on earth does Skarloey act the way he does in The Old Bridge? I'll start off with a theory I have. The Old Bridge occurs when Skarloey and Rhaenys first arrived on Sodor. They're the only 2 engines working on the Skarloey Railway in the episode, and barring a minor, unnamed Duncan appearance, there's no sign of him, Rusty, or Peter Sam at all. Coincidence? I think not. But even if The Old Bridge doesn't take place during the olden days, it still works, and that's because Skarloey is, frankly, not out of character. Skarloey's refusal to cross the bridge is a very normal reaction to being involved in a freak accident that leaves you dangling and facing certain death. He almost died at the start of the episode, so of course he would be reluctant to go across the bridge again. People talk as though Skarloey acts like a whiny child throughout the entire 4.5-minute runtime of the episode, but he doesn't. I'd like to point out that there's a difference between acting like a child and being realistically traumatized after almost dying. I get that Skarloey's old and wise, but when in the Railway series did it say that he can't be scared? I'd argue that Skarloey would be more out of character if he didn't feel any fear during and after his accident. I do agree that he's ridiculously out of character in Wharf and Peace and Skarloey Storms Through, but those episodes are different. In Wharf and Peace, he constantly beats himself up, despite proving his bravery numerous times. And in Skarloey Storms Through, he immediately gives up, and makes no effort to conquer his fear of something he wasn't afraid of in the classic series. In The Old Bridge though, he's only afraid to cross the bridge once. He at first tries to cross it as normal, but he gets reminded of his brush with death, which makes him uneasy. However, when Rhaenys breaks down on the bridge, he rushes to help him without hesitation, while still being on edge. To me, this is good characterization rather than bad. If he really did act like the childish coward that people say he does, then he wouldn't face his fear to help Rhaenys. In my opinion, the scene where he rescues Rhaenys shows his true character. He's suffering from PTSD, but is willing to fight it and save the day. Yes, he was apprehensive about doing so, but the fact that he did it anyway shows how brave he is, and that he isn't a pathetic wimp. His act of bravery at the end is what people should focus on, not his anxiety at the start. Skarloey does act out of character in the Hit era, I agree, but that's because he's either a whiny wuss or a reckless daredevil. He's neither of them in Season 7. Regardless of what time period the old bridge takes place in, Skarloey's character works. There's no need to believe that the episode takes place during the olden days, because no matter how sagacious Skarloey is, he can still feel fear. If being scared is out of character for Skarloey, then in that case, his character regression began in Season 5's Rusty and the Boulder. Why did Skarloey run away from that boulder? That's so childish. If he was in character, he would have told that rock to go back to where it came from. The old bridge is probably what caused the team of Hit to butcher Skarloey later on, but that's not the episode's fault. It was likely just trying to show a new side to Skarloey and add to his character. This brings me to the next part of the video, where I look at the episode itself and see if it's good or bad. I personally believe that The Old Bridge is a good episode because of how it adds to Skarloey's character rather than regresses it. As I said earlier, a lot of people say that Skarloey would never be so scared after an accident, but I think that's why Skarloey is the episode's protagonist. Seeing a wise, strong engine like Skarloey being traumatized is more impactful than someone like Peter Sam doing so, because it makes us realise that anyone is susceptible to PTSD, even if they're 100 years old. The way I see it, that's what the episode's intention was. A lot of people love Henry's Forest, you know, the episode Audrey hated, for the same reason, saying that it's nice to see a softer side to Henry. I feel the same for The Old Bridge. In the Railway series, we see Skarloey as a wise giver of advice to younger engines, but we never see him having any struggles of his own. We always assume that he's a grand, superior figure who can rise amongst the rest. But in Season 7, we see what makes him tick. When he goes through a horrific incident that almost kills him, he's badly scarred, and for the first time, we see a weaker side to him, one that makes us realise that Skarloey isn't flawless. But it doesn't regress him. He doesn't whine or beat himself up, and he certainly doesn't do any careless stunts. He is frightened after his near-death experience, as anyone else would be, but when duty calls, he's ready to fight his demons and help others in need. I personally believe that The Old Bridge is Skarloey's best episode. It shows us sides to him that we haven't seen before, but maintains his original character whilst also giving him more depth. There are other episodes like Toby's Discovery and Percy and the Haunted Mine, where the protagonist acts scared and is accused of being childish, while other people try to justify their fear. I agree that neither of those episodes flanderise their protagonists, but in my opinion, The Old Bridge is better than both of them. I think this because, unlike the likes of Haunted Mine, Skarloey's fear is the grounds of the story. Not only do we see Skarloey's journey in getting his courage back against the odds, but we also learn a valuable lesson from it. One of the most unfair criticisms that Season 7 receives is how it pushed morals further than the seasons beforehand. There is nothing I disagree with more than this statement. Not only do people exaggerate how conspicuous Season 7's morals were, but the morals themselves were much, much better than the ones from Seasons 1 through 5. In the first 5 seasons, morals focus on characters being jerks and acting as unlikable as possible. A fine example of this is Thomas and the Rumours. In Season 7 though, morals focus on the victimised characters and gets you to feel for them. If The Old Bridge was from Season 5, it would likely be about Duncan making fun of Skarloey's crash only to undergo a similar one himself. But instead, we see how Skarloey feels, and we learn what his weakness is and how he conquers it. This episode is aimed at people who went through a similar experience to Skarloey, and they in turn understand what he goes through. Skarloey really wants to go over that bridge again, but his trauma tugs against him. He feels ashamed for being unable to do so, but when Rheneas needs his help, this motivates Skarloey to return to the place that he nearly died and master his fear. The Old Bridge tells its audience that it's okay to be afraid of something, but it's also necessary to overcome it. It's a strong moral, one that a lot of people can relate to. The moral itself is delivered nicely and not stuffed in your face at all, as opposed to the likes of Dream On, an awful episode that can't go 5 seconds without shoving the already obvious moral down people's throats. A moral being present in the episode shouldn't take away from it. I'm just going to say it, but I'd gladly take an episode with a moral over an uneventful things happen to a character episode. Episodes that feature Thomas getting fish stuck in his boiler or Percy finding a stray ram on the tracks have nothing to them, but a moral can lead to a character learning something and developing, and this gives the episode a purpose and something to talk about. I'm going to ask you now, how many times has someone made a video on the episode Bah? I think I just reminded you that that episode exists, didn't I? The Old Bridge's moral shows us that Skarloey isn't perfect the way the Railway series makes him out to be, but that he's still a valiant and determined engine, and that overcoming fear takes time, but can be done through the power of friendship, as shown when Skarloey rescues Rheneas. Speaking of which, not only did the Old Bridge add to Skarloey's character, but it also gave more depth to his friendship with Rheneas. In Season 4, the relationship between these two old engines is simply stated. Even though we're told that Rheneas and Skarloey are strong friends, we never see them interact together, other than when Rheneas returns home and Skarloey is wearing his smiling face. The Old Bridge, on the other hand, is the first episode in which we see their dynamic throughout. We learn that Skarloey cares so much for Rheneas that even when he's traumatized, he'll throw all of it aside when his best friend is in trouble. Skarloey's determination to help Rheneas is the best thing about this episode, because it's so strong that it helps Skarloey defeat his PTSD. It's thanks to this episode that we understand how strong their brotherly friendship is. Overall, this is a very good episode, and not one I would call bad. It shouldn't be classed as the worst episode of Season 7, or even the entire classic era, because even if Skarloey is out of character, there's nothing else wrong with the episode. A single out of character moment isn't enough to make an episode bad. There are other factors that need to be considered when judging an episode, such as the way it's written and how it's executed, etc. There are many other episodes that are far worse than this one, some contenders being The Trouble with Mud, Thomas and the Rumours and Buffer Bother, but the episode that earns the title of worst classic episode for me is Trust Thomas. I can't stand this episode, and there is so much to hate about it. Firstly, Thomas is extremely out of character. I've said before that I hate him in Season 3, and this episode explains why. In Season 2, he was very flawed and not the nicest guy, but in Season 3, he's an absolute saint with no transition between these two incompatible characters at all. This is how he's depicted in every single appearance he makes in Season 3, and it's at its worst in this episode. But that's not all. Gordon and James are also out of character. Why is Gordon encouraging James to lie about his work? He seemed really annoyed when James did it to him. And why is James listening to him? What happened to their rivalry from the previous episodes? Also, didn't James learn to not do this in No Joke for James? That's a serious inconsistency there. The crash is borderline nonsensical, and there's a subplot involving Bertie that has nothing to do with the main plot. This makes the episode really convoluted and forgettable. It took me 3 rewatches to understand the plot of it, and it's very hard to believe that it's an adaptation of Trucks, which is meant to be a rather simple Railway series story. But worst of all, neither Gordon nor James receive any form of comeuppance or punishment for what they make Thomas go through. What's the moral of this episode supposed to be? I hold this episode below Edward Strikes Out. It's honestly no wonder Audrey hated Season 3. But The Old Bridge doesn't have any of those problems. It has a stable, straightforward plot and a strong message that kids and adults alike can relate to. Skarloey is likeable throughout the episode, in character or not, and we see new sides to his character and his friendship with Rheneas. I don't think The Old Bridge is perfect, the action could have been treated more seriously, but overall it's a solid episode, and not bad in the slightest. In conclusion, I defend The Old Bridge. It does a good job at building on Skarloey's character and telling its moral, and when compared to abominations like Trust Thomas, I don't understand why it would be considered bad, let alone the worst of its era. I'd put The Old Bridge in my top 10 Season 7 episodes, if it weren't for the fact that there are many more episodes in that season that are even better. After this analysis, I think I should go ahead and call Season 7 my favourite season of all time. It doesn't have any bad episodes. I enjoyed every single one of them, except for Rheneas and the roller coaster, but that episode is just average at worst. Season 7 being the best of the bunch for me may or may not be getting a big video of its own someday, who knows. Season 6 and 7 in general are both severely overlooked seasons. This is my 4th video on Season 7 being underrated, so I think it's only fair Season 6 gets some spotlight of its own. My next episode of Thomas Compared will give it just that, and it will be a comparison between characters instead of episodes this time. Be on the lookout for that video, and subscribe for more content.